welcome to our second episode of Triple Take Cinema. I'm Dustin. With me, as always, in the last episode, is Alex and Kyle. And in this podcast series, the three of us tackle three movies with some sort of common denominator of a theme. This week, I picked the three movies, and I picked John Carpenter's Apocalypse Trilogy, quote unquote, in air quotes. The movies are The Thing, Prince of Darkness, and In the Mouth of Madness. I've seen all three of these movies before. I'm a big fan. The Thing is easily in my top 4 movies of all time, if not my favorite movie of all time. So I've definitely seen that one in outsized amount compared to the other two, but was very familiar with all three of these. I'm a big Carpenter fan on top of that. How about each of you? What familiarity did you have with any of these movies?
Yeah, so I had only seen The Thing prior to this, and it's been about a decade since I'd seen The Thing. Really only had fragmented memories of the ending, of action scenes, but it was really nice to be able to revisit and kind of immerse myself in the whole thing. I had not seen either Prince of Darkness or In the Mouth of Madness. In the Mouth of Madness had been on my to-do list for a while as someone who is a big H.P. Lovecraft fan, as someone who likes Sam Neill and generally digs Carpenter. So this was a treat to get to visit all three of these, 2 of which were first-time watches for me. Kyle, what about you?
Yeah, same. I've seen The Thing. I've seen it a long time ago. Can't remember when I saw it last, but probably more than 8 to 10 years ago, I'd say. I had not seen In the Mouth of Madness. I had not seen Prince of Darkness. And full disclosure, I would never have seen these movies at all before you guys suggested them. These are, generally speaking, I am historically anti-horror.
Ooh, anti-horror.
Yeah, I'm anti is probably strong, but I enjoy hyperbole, so let's go with it. I'm anti-horror, like the Antichrist or the anti-God or what have you. Yeah, I mean, horror for me is a lot like what a lot of people say about country music, right? Like, I don't like country music, but I like insert Johnny Cash, insert Merle Haggard, insert, you know what I mean? Like, I don't like country music, but I do really like those 10 Garth Brooks songs, like whatever it is. There's this thing where people use it as a way to assert their taste or whatever. And that's not really what I'm doing. I just, early on in my film stuff, I struggled with horror, and I struggled with being very, very afraid. And The Sixth Sense actually sent me straight into therapy for the rest of my life. I'm still in therapy but not because of that.
Maybe a bit problematic. It's like 22 years later. It's still just
struggling.
Bruce Willis and the Jaws, man. I can't get it. I can't get away from it. That's the only thing that keeps me in the third.
Now it's Fat Haley Joe just haunting me all the time.
That's a different kind of fear. Let's be clear.
Yeah. No, I struggled with that for a while, and then that therapist did say to me at one point, I had just relapsed, and I had watched The Exorcist at a high school.
That's an extreme place to go for it, for sure.
At a high school party. And he basically said to me, he's like, well, you can avoid these movies for the rest of your life. Like, watch a lot of them to sort of desensitize yourself to it. And I went the other way with it. And I watched all these movies and all that. And now I don't like none of that. I'm not concerned. And that was, I worked my way through all the horror stuff. There are some horror movies that I really, really, really like. But this type of horror, a little bit more campy, I guess I'll use that term, and not necessarily, it's not a pejorative, but Yeah, I struggle with these types of movies and with this time period of horror where the graphics are what they are. And at times, it's like that cutting edge stuff, right? When these things are coming out, a lot of it, and then it doesn't necessarily shoot well, and I don't appreciate the lack of aging. But all that is to say, I had not seen Prince of Darkness. I had not seen In the Mouth of Madness. Um, I had seen The Thing. I think The Thing is great for many reasons we can get into. But yeah, that was where I'm at. But yeah, I'm a horror hater.
I'm curious. I'm just not to not to belabor that too long, but I'm always interested. When people say they don't like horror, trying to understand where that comes from, and you kind of already answered that with fear being it, because I think there's a lot, especially people that have gotten more exposed to horror in the last 20 years as opposed to in the 70s, 80s, 90s, which is really where these movies fall into the puzzle. Post 2000, you get into the torture porn and that kind of stuff that categorizes for horror, and I enjoy some of that too, but I understand why people dislike that in general. But it's I guess maybe I lost track of where I wanted to go with that. Well, as you've continued to not be a huge horror fan, even though you've moved, worked past your fear component of it, do you feel like your aversion to it is predicated just on the history that you've had with it, or do you feel like it's more kind of bad pun, but hacky, not, I don't want to presume that you're being, that your nose is tilted high, but do you feel like it's a little bit beneath you in a way, or that it's not, as good as other films in that regard? Or is it really just because you have a shitty history with it and it's just never became something you enjoyed?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's definitely a fair question. I don't think it's because of my history with it. I actually think that very similar to, I tend to simply not be an adrenaline junkie.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to pigeonhole horror into just adrenaline junkieism, but I don't seek out roller coasters. I don't seek out skydiving. Those things, that type of rush isn't something that I've ever really been attracted to. And horror movies to me are similar in that way to some of those types of events or some of those types of activities that one can engage in, where I like to come out of a movie feeling emotionally affected in a way that makes me rethink something about myself, or rethink something about the world, or rethink something about my relationships, or all that type of that, those movies that really stick with me and sit with me for days after. That's kind of what I'm more attracted to, and what I'm really looking for when it comes to my movie watching. And I just haven't found horror, other than horror movies that are generally speaking around dystopian stuff,
Mm-hmm.
where it can kind of also say something about the world. For example, recent horror movies that I really enjoyed, Quiet Place and Quiet
Mm-hmm.
Place 2.
Yep.
I thought those were very good. That type of dystopian, Fallout stuff is great. I tend to generally steer away from zombies and vampires because I find it to be, I don't like zombies, vampires, and werewolves. And in fact, werewolves to me are fuck off. I just don't even want to, I don't want to talk about werewolves. I can live with vampires in some, I think it can be done well. Zombies, I think, is the hardest thing to do well. I find it very, but I did love 28 Days Later, which some would say is not a zombie movie, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, I think it's a zombie movie.
Yeah.
But it's its own little sub thing, but it definitely,
So when horror is merged with the fall of culture and the fall of civilization, I find it very interesting. When horror is just really scary stuff, and I guess here's a movie that I maybe should have liked, is how a lot of people in my life would say, Hereditary.
Mhm.
Hereditary is a movie that I watched, and you get to the end, and I get to the end of it, and I'm kind of like, I don't fucking care about this at all. And that's just, that to me is how it's difficult for horror to leap and get that gap for me personally.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
realize
for
that,
sure.
yeah, it can be a super enjoyable experience, and that's exactly, people want to be jump scared. People, and
Yeah.
people want that, like, and when the emotional, effect that I'm looking for on myself, if people are looking for that in the actual movie. They're looking to be like on edge. They're, you know what I mean? And that's awesome. And if that's what you want, go for it. But yeah, I also feel though, and similar to rom-coms, right? Like there's like an elevated level of rom-com that's just amazing. And then you get into all this other whatever that is just terrible. And I think that that's also something that plagues horror, and it plagues everything else, but
for sure.
It seems to plague horror in a way where people think about it more. Like, oh, there's all this bad horror movies or whatever. But, there's been some really good ones that I've really enjoyed. And I do tend to, and I will say I liked The Thing of all these movies the best again, because it is a little bit more psychological thriller.
Oh, for sure. For sure.
Which I'm super into. And it is, it has a smart or interesting intellectual, like, when you don't know who you're looking at or interacting with is real, similar to like AI movies and robot movies, and just, I don't know what I'm looking at is real or who this is or if this is a copy or whatever. That's a very film-wise just fun place to exist in.
Right.
Yeah.
There's a level of like psychological layering that happens there that's really intriguing.
Yeah.
I definitely got that with The Thing as well.
Yeah. That's awesome. And I mean, like, I can totally understand and empathize with that perspective. Just for context, and maybe this becomes a little mini soundbite episode we put on or something, this discussion. And Alex, you can feel free to jump in and give us your own horror backstory about this after if you want. But like, my background with horror, like, I hate being scared. I hate it. Like, I hate jump scares. Like, my dad and I would watch scary movies together. We'd rent them on VHS, and like, he would mute it, and then we would fast forward, or no, we would mute it and fast forward to see when the jump scare happened, and then we would play and rewind, and we knew the jump scare was going to happen. But it would still freak us out. I agree about like the dystopian worlds and things like that. That's always been my favorite subgenre of horror, which, I think there's plenty of dystopia movies that wouldn't categorize as horror, but like, that's part of why I love like Romero's original Dead trilogy, Night, Day, and Dawn. You get into his movies post dawn or day, and it gets a little worse, but I think that there's like, for me, it's kind of like a challenge internally of like, what can I see that like kind of gets under my skin a little bit? What can I see that actually like grosses me out today? But there was a period in my life where, when I was still in high school, I thought maybe I would want to be a mortician. And so I don't want to say that I have like an impenetrable stomach when it comes to gore, because like, there is some gross shit, especially like real gore, is like part of why I never became a mortician. But I love like seeing gore on the screen and like watching behind the scenes of like how they made it and stuff like that. I grew up watching the Evil Dead movies and like the documentaries on how those movies were made. So for me, like, horror is it's a challenge in many ways. But I definitely feel like I enjoy a horror that has deliberacy behind it beyond just like pure jump scares. Like, I like it when there's an interesting story or an interesting like undertone. And I think these three movies, one of them maybe not as much as the other two, have that kind of underscore in a really cool way. But before I you jump into that, Alex, do you want to share your horror backstory a little bit of like where your level of appreciation or non-appreciation comes from?
Absolutely. I would love to get into my horror origin story. And what's been cool about hearing you two share your perspective is I feel like I'm kind of in that Venn diagram overlap between both of those, where I was a kid with a very overactive imagination. So when I was younger, I avoided horror purely out of that aversive fear reaction. Um, it was specifically Tim Burton's Sleepy Hollow that I
Oh
saw
yeah.
way too young. And there's a scene in that movie where Johnny Depp's character goes into the cave to meet like this witch character, and she jumps at the camera, her eyeballs pop out of her skull. Seeing it as an adult, it is like incredibly campy and silly. But as a kid, I was like fucking screaming out of the room, like, not doing this again. And it was just something I didn't seek out, throughout my childhood and really even in high school. And it wasn't until my 20s when I kind of had a reappreciation for horror. And I think it had to do with kind of a lot of these prestige horror films that started coming out, I'd say maybe around a decade ago, where I was visiting one of my friends in Austin, Texas, and we had tickets to see a screening of The Babadook. And
Hmm.
I loved that movie, and I loved it for its thematic richness and the way that it used horror to comment on things like mental illness and parent-child relationships. And at the same time, I finally got that adrenaline rush of kind of testing myself and being like, oh, I can do horror. This feels satisfying on a visceral, emotional level, also on an intellectual level, because I can then, unpack how the scares and the themes intersect. Uh, I've always been a fan of The Shining. The Shining's probably the one horror movie that I watch, even in my avoidance phase of horror. Um, but after watching The Babadook, I saw some other movies kind of in a similar vein where there was, you know, thematic richness that was being mined there. It Follows was a big one. I really loved seeing that. Um,
Sequel coming out
so
soon too with It Follows.
I'm excited for that. Um,
I will
and
say,
I
I just
really loved Luca Guadagnino's Suspiria remake. I saw that in theaters and thought that was fucking fantastic. Um, and now where I'm at with horror is that it's not often something I will actively seek out. But if I'm invited to see a movie with someone, if, say, a friend who I'm doing a podcast with recommends 3 thematic related horror movies, I am fucking all in. And I loved watching these, but I think I just need that little extra push to get to that point where I wouldn't quite pick these on my own volition.
yeah. One thing, I was lucky enough, Alex, to see the Babadook at the Stanley Hotel horror festival in one of their theaters there.
Oh yes.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
so jealous.
I'm able to get to the Stanley because with all that the horror lore that's there, which is incredible. And then for me, horror is very much like unless we are going to a seafood restaurant, I am probably not ordering fish at a restaurant.
Yeah.
And everyone will be like, "Oh, so you don't like fish?" I'm like, "Absolutely not. I love fish. It's great." But if you go to a place where I can get beef, pork, chicken, and fish, I just tend to never order it.
Yep.
That's kind of how it is. Yeah. But if we go to the all-you-can-eat seafood buffet, I will get some crab legs. I'll enjoy myself. I'll get some. So, yeah.
Well, and I feel like horror in general is something, in many ways, more so, in my opinion. And I feel like most people would agree with this to some extent. Maybe not like the most of all the genres of movies, but certainly up in the upper echelon of genres that is better when you are watching it with others. And that can be with, 1 or 2 friends in the same room, or certainly seeing a movie in the theater, like a scary movie in the theater.
Absolutely.
It was a really fun, can be a really fun experience. In my opinion, even more fun, like if you know the movie, but not everybody in the crowd knows the movie. So like when those moments happen, like you can maybe feel more of like what's going on in the crowd since you already kind of know what's going to come up on screen. But this is a good opportunity to pivot into talking about our 3 movies. And I've thought of a million different ways to intercede into that. But all the things that I wanted to go into it like as a spin-off point go into Prince of Darkness, but I want to do these in the order that we watched them, which is also the order that they came out. So that is The Thing, which I believe was 1981. I should have this up on the screen, but I don't. Prince of Darkness,
82 for The Thing.
82. Prince of Darkness, I think, was 87. I want to say, I believe I noted that. And then In the Mouth of Madness is 92, right?
94.
94. Oh, wow. Okay, that's weird because that movie feels almost 80s, if not very early 90s, not 94, 90s. But let's start with The Thing. Best movie of all time or greatest movie of all time? Which one? No, how did Stephen Colbert used to do The Thing? Great movie or greatest movie? Because he used to ask people, Barack Obama, great president or greatest president? So what? I guess I can I can't remember the first time I saw The Thing, but I can remember the last time I saw it, which was 4 days ago, because I could probably watch this movie every week of my life and like find something different to enjoy about it or appreciate about it or like have more clarity on. But I think it's just a really great story that people can find to be highly accessible, whether or not you like horror at all. Like I've shown this movie to people who hate horror or are horror adverse. And they come out of it saying, that's a good movie. I would recommend that movie to others because it really, it's just like tells such a great, captivating story on top of the horror elements. I mean, the horror elements are a key component to it, but like every jump scare feels like it was earned and deserved and exceptionally well executed. And every like effect is just amazing. I mean, that's one thing that The Thing is well known for is the incredible practical effects. So all around, I could just feign this over this movie ad nauseum. I'll let you guys talk a little bit.
So I think one thing that really jumped out to me, and I agree with everything you just said, Dustin, is this movie has a perfect script. There is not an ounce of fat on this script.
Yes.
Every line provides some insight into a character's motivation, into the lore of the thing itself, some kind of shading. And let's, as we say in journalism, follow the chronology. And let's start with that opening scene that I just love how when you know what's happening, it totally recontextualizes those events.
Yep.
Where we're seeing this helicopter chasing a dog, shooting at the dog. And the first time you see the thing, where are your sympathies as an audience member? They're obviously not with the people in the fucking helicopter who are shooting at like an adorable husky who is running away from them. You know, your allegiance is very much with the Americans who are like, what the hell are you doing? Like, you guys are blowing yourselves up. You're attacking the church. We're going to put you down. But on this rewatch, I remembered seeing this movie before, and I knew exactly why they were shooting that dog. And I was so pissed at our protagonists, at the Americans, for, in my mind, on this rewatch, killing that last Norwegian in cold blood when he was just trying to eliminate the thing. And that's such a delicate balance between, playing audience sympathies and where your allegiances lie. And I love that it works equally well if you don't know what's happening and if you do know what's happening.
Yeah. And I don't know exactly what the dialogue is, but I know that whatever the guy is saying, the Norwegian guy or Swedish guy, whatever nationality is, whatever he's saying in the foreign language, if you translate it to English, he's saying something like, kill it, it's an alien, or something literally that like suddenly makes so much more sense, or like that it's not human or something like that. I also like, I won't say it bothers me, but I find it like comical every time I watch it of just how inept they do this with the grenade when he pulls the pin and like arcs his hand for over his head and just throws the grenade. It's like, it's such like a kind of like, I don't know if this is the right use of like Deus Ex Machina of just like, okay, so you needed to blow up the helicopter. How do we blow up the helicopter in a way that makes sense? Maybe he like misthrows the grenade, but he's standing in front of the helicopter, so he throws it behind him on accident or something.
There's a slapstick element, but then you think about what those men have been through to get to this point, and you're like, of course they're going to make a mistake. They're exhausted.
yeah.
They've been fighting this thing
Oh.
for who knows how many hours. So it totally makes sense in universe. But yes, there's definitely like a comedic, farcical nature.
Well, and it also makes sense that like, sure, he can handle himself with a rifle because he probably hunts, but like, you don't really have a ton of experience throwing grenades, so he's probably not like, in that panic of a moment and everything. But yeah, like I agree that whole opening scene like kind of sets the tone. And when you know the story, it's infuriating to know like, well, if they just would have like not let the dog in, or if the dude would have been a better shot and killed the dog,
would have
problem solved.
Left a better shot. Terrible, terrible, terrible shot. That's like, yeah. No, I really enjoy. I mean, I enjoy any opening scene to a movie that just kind of puts you like, what is happening? Because I wasn't really thinking like about my previous viewing. I mean, I obviously knew where it was going, but I wasn't actually locked into. And very quickly I got there, but the first 15, 20 seconds, I'm like, what is happening right now? And then it gets into it very quickly. You're dead on about the script. Like the pacing it's very well paced as well. Like it doesn't ever, you don't ever feel like it's dragging at any point, which is really nice. Like you always feel that tension. And I think more than the two other movies in this trilogy, I'll say that, simply because of the setting and where it is and the remote nature and where they're at, no civilization at all. The score to me was much more impactful here because it really, there is a weird tension and uneasiness that is surrounding when you're in that kind of desolation, when you're in that kind of nothingness, and silence has this. It can take over all of the auditory field, and what was accomplished score wise to go along with the pacing, to go along with what you're seeing. That to me was, and I think that's also something that horror can overdo, and it was just pitch perfect for the whole way through. And then you add on top of that Kurt Russell crushing. That to me, I was in very quickly because it really grabs you immediately. And then it doesn't stop. I love that just moment of things haven't hit the fan yet. And the dog is just chilling and walking through, and you have that sense of ominousness, and it's wonderful in that way.
Well, and even like, I always thought it was interesting because like there's parts of this movie, there's not a lot, but there's a couple parts where probably like in the third act when shit really has hit the fan, and I don't remember exactly where it is, but like Kurt Russell's like, oh, we're going to go back up to my shack because I turned the light off when I left, and the light's on up in the shack. And it gets very disorienting after that cut because suddenly time fast forwards like 2 hours or an hour, and we're not told that. There's really no visual indication that happens. But somebody stumbles back. I forget the character's name, but I think he's the cook that was with him, stumbles back, and he's alone, and he got separated from Kurt Russell. And Kurt Russell appears, and he's clearly been outside for, actually, I don't think very long, but since it's like sub-zero temperatures, it looks like he's been out there for like a day. I've always found that a little bit disorienting in terms of like, wait, who went where? What happened? How did you get separated when you can like see the shack? It's like 500 feet away. But I think the last 2 or 3 times I've watched this, and I've probably watched it like 60 times, I've finally started to figure out that logic of what's happening, and I'm like, okay, I get why this is deliberate. It's fucking with your head because the characters don't know what the fuck is going on. they're as confused as we are. So it's not like information isn't being presented to us clearly. It's like, no, like the characters don't have like that clear information. People are kind of lost and disjointed. And so that's something I feel like I've begun to appreciate even more, is the couple moments where I'm like, wait, what is going on? What's happening? That's deliberate, and it just kind of adds to the chaos of the movie. The other thing that I recently noticed, and I think it was called out in another podcast or something, but that I never like fully processed, when Wilford Brimley's character, what's his character's name again? I should know this if I'm a real fan. When Wilford Blair, when they lock Blair up because he figured out what was going on and destroyed everything. When they locked him up, he was not infected. When they go to get him, when they check on him because they're trying to look for someone, and he says, I'm all right, I'm better now, you gotta let me in. In the background, you can see a noose hanging in the shack, which I interpret to be that he was infected at that point because he was going to kill himself, got infected, and then the alien infecting him like told him to stick around or whatever. The other thing that I feel like I finally understood this time, which maybe I'll cut this out of the podcast because I don't want to admit that I didn't understand it, but I think I always had in my head that the alien makes a copy of you. Like, I always thought that the alien killed you and copied you, like morphed into a version of you.
Right.
And I think the reason I thought that was one of the first people that changes when they chase him down outside and he like looks at the camera and screams and he's got like the long fingers or whatever. I always thought that he was like changing from a thing into a human. But watching it this time, I feel pretty confident that I think the thing that convinced me of this was seeing Blair's little computer model, super old school computer thing of the cell infecting you. But the thing merges with your body, does some weird shit, and, you know, goes in and out and blah, 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 and then becomes part of you and takes over you. Which makes so much more sense now that I understand that than I think it ever did for me before.
Yeah, it definitely seemed to me like a parasite type of situation. And that eventually it was done with you and moved on, kind of how it did with the dog.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, it's very, that the dog is chilling there and then it's just, nope, we're moving on. And then it doesn't really know what to do with itself when that moment happens and it breaks down and all those things. I mean, I think the lack of understanding about the mechanics is obviously a big part of why
it's so effective.
Yeah. Because when it's truly, I mean, like, if you could spend all day twisting yourself in knots trying to understand, like, okay, like, so why did the one dude, he was fine and he had a heart attack or whatever, but he was the thing, and then his chest had a mouth and it ate the hands, and then his head fell off, and then grew out spider. Like, well, I mean, that's part of what makes it awesome. Is not like it's completely unpredictable what it's going to do next and what powers it has. That I also feel like at the end when Blair's fully infected and kills the one guy by like sticking his fingers into his face or whatever. That part never made sense to me because I'm like, what is he doing exactly? But I guess if you think of it as like his skin is merging with him or something crazy like that. But I sound like I'm criticizing this movie, but I'm not. I don't care that none of that makes sense because the underlying, I mean, that again goes to, I presume this movie takes place over the course of like 6 hours, and the chaos that erupts in that time frame for all these guys that are in this space, not knowing what's coming to them, and all of a sudden there's only 2 of them left while everything else is in flames.
Is he building a spaceship at some point?
Yes, he is.
Yeah. I like,
which I guess, you know, now makes me rethink whether it takes place in 6 hours, because he got really, really far on that spaceship. Like, he was
But if
Yeah,
he
yeah.
has an alien intelligence, he could
True.
assemble that thing
True.
very
Yeah.
quickly.
And maybe he dug that hole extra quickly too.
I mean, that's why I like the scene or the setting of this movie so much, is because you're in a place where time and darkness and space, because of the snow, like nothing is what it seems, and you can be tricked all the time by real simple traverses of space outside. And I mean, the sunlight is weird and all that stuff. Like, we don't know how long this is going on for at all. Yeah, and I mean, at the jump scare with the blood.
Oh, yeah.
They're testing the blood.
Oh, that's like the best scene in the movie.
Yeah, that
I
one.
think what's so good is that no matter how many times I see that scene, I always forget where the jump is.
Yes.
Because it's so perfectly constructed where I don't think it even shows the name on the vial.
Yep.
With all the other vials, you see like a close-up of the character's name and then McReady dipping the hot like metal into it. But when it finally is the thing, you don't get that like close-up. So it just comes out of fucking nowhere.
Yep. Every time. I know it's coming, but it still gets me. And I like, such suspense in that moment. And like, it's so great too, how like the dude that was the thing, like, you know, was just sitting there tied up. And I love that moment when the jump scare happens and then they cut to the bench and there's two other guys on the bench. And the guy that's the thing is just like having convulsions, and like, you have the fact that it just like goes berserk. And then it grew like he breaks out of his bindings, and the giant mouth bites Windows, and the comical scene of him thrashing Windows' body around like a true rag doll, like completely not with any sort of weight attached to it or anything. Yeah, and then the dude with the eyebrows guy has the great line after they confirm that he's not infected about he would like to not spend the rest of his time tied in the fucking chair or whatever.
Yeah, no, that's him, and that whole scene is great. And I mean, for me as well, this movie kind of elevate to that, you know, to what we were talking about before, like what horror gets you and why you appreciated it at all, and all those things. The kind of the scene at the end where, you know, Kurt Russell is just like, yeah, we're not getting out of here. That's not happening. That to me is kind of the moment that, I mean, it's all great beforehand, but in terms of the thing that brings it to this full circle and really stick with me, is to see people go on that journey and get to the realization that they're not getting out ever. That is kind of their duty almost to see this through to the end without it becoming a whole thing for the whole world. And I thought that scene was very well executed and just done well by Kurt and all those things. And the resignation of that moment is solid.
Yeah,
I agree.
And you feel that weight of them being just stranded in the cold Arctic. I also
what I love about that moment with McReady when he recognizes, yeah, we're not getting out of here alive, is that it recontextualizes what happens earlier with Blair, when Blair goes crazy and destroys the blood, destroys the equipment. Because when you're watching that part of the movie, you think, oh, he's going crazy. But in hindsight, it's kind of a heroic act that he's doing. It's like a self-sacrificial. He's like, we need to sacrifice ourselves so that the entire world doesn't get subsumed by this thing. And I just love how there are two such different ways of, you know, I think self-sacrifice is a big theme in this movie, especially in that, you know, very famous ending, which I'm sure we'll get to at some point. But yeah, I love how McReady, you know, accepts that realization. And I love, you know, kind of the hysteria of Blair accepting that way earlier in the film.
Yeah. Right. And that's another thing I feel like I've noticed in recent viewings. In particular, when Blair's taking the axe to all the radio equipment, he's like, it's very easy to like dismiss whatever he's shouting especially if you don't have subtitles on or anything. But like he's saying stuff that kind of telegraphs that like I think he literally says, "I know what's going on here," and like if you, especially with hindsight, like you know what he's talking about. That like, oh yeah, like we can't call in reinforcements or like call for help or anything like that. But it begs the question of like, when did Blair turn? Because, you know, the radio equipment makes sense, but the blood vials, if Blair destroyed the blood vials, like that doesn't make sense for him to do that unless he didn't want anyone to know who was infected and who wasn't. But that, so another good question to the point you had, Alex, about the ending. Do you think either of them are infected at the end?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different ways that you can play that ending. And I know that Carpenter has said that if you look at the clues the movie provides you, you can tell who is or isn't the thing. And I think I'm less interested in that, in looking at things like, I know a lot of people have highlighted the fact that Child, his breath doesn't show up on camera as an indication that he's the thing. Or the fact that McGreedy says earlier in the movie, you know, everyone drinks their own stuff. Nobody eats food, someone else's food. And then he offers Childs the booze and Childs to swig. And McGreedy kind of chuckles to himself. That could be another indication that Childs is a thing. But to me, it's almost kind of an irrelevant question because it's about that paranoia. It's about the suspicion. And I think either one of them or both of them are definitely the thing. And I think that in the context of the other two movies that we watched, because this is the Apocalypse trilogy, and if both of them are human and they freeze to death, then the thing's over. It was extinguished by McCready. But if one or both of them are it and they freeze to death, then they just stay there in the ice for a rescue team to dig them up. So I think I lean towards Childs being the thing, or Childs and McCready both being the thing and having sort of a standoff at the very end. Kyle, what are your thoughts on how the film ends?
I think they're both infected for sure. And I agree. If it is the Apocalypse trilogy, I don't think I think it's all gone completely belly up. And there's, that's just my, but it does with that. It does feel, I don't know. It doesn't feel over. It just feels, I mean, this whole thing started with some stuff buried in ice from however long ago, millions of years, whatever it is. And so even if we don't know the mechanics, we don't know this stuff. And so whatever ending we get with this group of characters, to me, just feels like you could have just made a whole bunch of other movies out of this and brought it back in any time you wanted to. And I think I go back to that in the initial scene where the spaceship lands on Earth at some unknown time way back in way back.
Yeah.
So to me, they're both infected, and this saga is over. But we will get another one of these for sure. I'm very excited for the global warming redo of the thing where the ice caps melt. And
well, to that point, and after this, we can maybe move on to the next movie. Some interesting facts with the thing. So there is a prequel that came out, I believe, in 2011, also called The Thing, which is not well revered. I actually have a soft spot for it. The biggest gripe with it, which I'm inclined to agree, is that all the effects are CG and they look stupid. Especially when you look at behind the scenes footage, and they had originally planned on using practical effects like the original movie, and they decided to go with CG because it was cheaper. Big mistake. But I always thought it was a super cool movie because it literally tells the story that leads of what's happening at the Norwegian base, and what leads up to the events of the original movie. So if you go, the end of this prequel literally is the dog running away and they take off in the helicopter. So you can watch them back to back, and it feels like one longer story. Like, I definitely feel like it's worth watching if you're a fan of this movie, because I think the story they tell is interesting, not necessary by any means, but it's interesting and competently done, minus the effects. We'd be remiss not to mention the fact that The Thing is technically a remake of The Thing from Another World, a much older movie that thematically is very different, involves a anthropomorphic alien walking around and things like that, black and white. But the thing that I think is, pardon the pun, the thing that I think is the most interesting is there was an actual video game in 2002, also called The Thing, for original Xbox, that expanded on the story from the movie, like took place immediately, well, a few months after the movie, but came back to the research base. And McCready had survived. And I believe this video game is technically canon. So McCready survived. It's never really explained how he survived or why. But in the spoilers for the video game, it's been 22 years, so I doubt ruining it for anyone. He gets away, and it's never revealed that he's infected or anything. So presumably he was never infected, if you go by the canon of the video game. I am not sure, however, about Childs, if Childs was infected or not. Let's shift gears to Prince of Darkness. I want to open this by saying, Alex, you were talking about you saw that scene in Sleepy Hollow that really disturbed you and creeped you. Kyle, you talked about The Sixth Sense creeping you out. I vividly remember watching Prince of Darkness on TV on Sci-Fi Channel or something when I was a kid in the 90s, and the recurring dream that everybody has of the figure, the Satan or whatever, coming to the doorway of the church and the smoke and the light behind it scared the living shit out of me. Absolutely terrified me. And I've watched this 3 or 4 times in my life. It's not that scary enough to watch it that much. I definitely had it's probably been 7 or 8 years since I rewatched this, and I definitely had braced for oh yeah, this is gonna creep me out a little bit, maybe get me a little PTSD from it or whatever. A, didn't happen as much as I thought it did. B, I mean, it's still a little unsettling, but
the grainy film and the voice,
yeah.
broadcasting from the year 19, it's eerie.
That's
eerie.
I think what always bothered me about it though is what the voice is saying, and nobody, even when they acknowledge they're all having the same dream, nobody's they have some very skirting the edges of oh, maybe this is a message from the future or whatever. But nobody's well, the guy literally says it's a message from the future, so maybe it is. They're kind of well, maybe it's something that someone got sent back and what
has to do with tachyons and babble.
So Prince of Darkness is an interesting one in any spectrum of films. But I always thought it was kind of unique because of, I definitely think it's unique because of its merging of horror and ostensibly science, even though it's a horror movie. It's not some science movie or something, but it's rare that I feel a movie takes this perspective on horror by really putting kind of a thick science angle to it of the existence of the horror here is science-based. And this actually goes a step further, I think, because it says, it exists in the scientific world, but then they reveal, they don't dwell on it too much, but that it's alien too, and talk about how the devil is and Jesus are aliens, which is an interesting path to go down with it. I'm curious what you guys thought of this movie.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead, Oaks.
Yeah, I had lots of thoughts about this, where I did appreciate that we got a new twist on the demonic possession horror movie, because that's what this is. It's a subversion of the satanic, ritual possession flick. And I liked the way that it did try and bring in those quantum physics, kind of components, but I don't think it quite stuck the landing. I admire how conceptually ambitious it was, but I think what highlights this is that example you were just talking about, Dustin, where we get this crazy kind of reveal about halfway through that the entire Catholic Church, all of Christianity, was basically a cover-up for Jesus, who was really an extraterrestrial, coming to Earth to warn us about this vat of green goo that possesses the son of the anti-god. And none of the characters fucking react to that information. Like, there's no conversation about like what that means. What are the implications? There are some oblique dialogue lines where a character will be like, oh, you missed the history lesson. It's like, oh, the history lesson where it was revealed that Jesus Christ was an alien? Like, you don't say. And that disconnect made it hard for those reveals to really have the kind of thematic weight that I think Carpenter was going for, just because it felt like there was kind of a vacuum between the characters reacting to things and the information that we were presented with as audience members. What did you think, Kyle?
Yeah, I mean, when this started out, I was kind of, oh, this is cool. Like, I appreciate the merger of science and horror, but more specifically, there's the sitting of the fence and the kind of happy gallivanting into science and religion and the history there. Because that Jesus is an extraterrestrial, that Satan is an extraterrestrial, that there's multidimensionality, that like we don't understand what matter is and antimatter and where the space is in between electrons and all that stuff I find fascinating. And I appreciated it as a jumping off point for this weird, again, a demonic possession movie. So I liked that a lot. And that being the support system for what was happening kept me involved because I just felt it was interesting. But this also there were more kind of wacky lines in this one and depth than there were in the thing that kind of pull me out of it a little bit. And there was a few more events that happened that I don't know. I kind of liked the weird closing in by this group of homeless people or drifters outside that was kind of unexplained.
Alice Cooper, baby.
Yeah. Great. Alice Cooper. I mean, how many times do you get to watch Alice Cooper impale someone with a bicycle?
Yeah.
Not often. Not every day that comes around.
It's very true. I did appreciate that when that was happening. I was like, oh, that's a weapon. He's using that bicycle as a weapon, and that guy doesn't see it coming. And I don't know why, but he doesn't see it coming at all.
That's for being a completely random kill, it's a pretty good one.
I know. I definitely agree. So I kind of liked, I just liked how it got to the action. I didn't love the action per se. And there was a lot more, unlike The Thing, there was a lot more movements of characters and interactions of characters when they were possessed and not possessed and all that stuff that just didn't, I mean, like you said, didn't stick the landing or whatever. But in those moments, they just didn't execute in a way where I was unnerved or put off in the way that I'm looking for maybe in a horror movie. And I think also the one of the moments, because this is one where I took a page out of your book, Dustin, and I was like, let me go fucking look at the Wikipedia and see what shit is happening here.
Yeah.
And I got some interesting tidbits out of that with the dimensionality and people getting stuck there and the mirrors and I thought that was all interesting. I liked the use of the upside down and reverse liquid stuff, but the way that the liquid sort of shot and infected people, I don't know. It just wasn't as affecting for me. And then,
agreed.
Just the way that like characters would battle with each other and not just kind of felt a little bit contrived at times. And I think it really is crystallized for me when that priest takes what has to be an extremely heavy axe and just kind of like licks it with this
at the mirror. The mirror shatters. And it's
like, this priest has engaged in zero athletic activity for his entire life.
Yeah.
None. And I'm just sitting there when he throws that axe. That to me is it was a moment where those are the moments where horror loses me,
Yeah.
where it just has to get to this thing. And I'm like, yeah, just do it in a different way. But I did like sort of the overall, I liked the message and I liked how they got to all those things. And I liked that there was this, yeah, I mean, if we get into a world, I liked when there was differential equations, but we hadn't invented them yet, as if like math is this weird language of the universe that brings everything together. And like, yeah, sure, Jesus Christ and Satan are extraterrestrials. I mean, if we're talking about multidimensionality and dimensions like built on top of one another, then sure, that's all I can totally get on board with heaven and hell just being that or what, in the Judeo-Christian context. All that I was on board for. It was just the actual mechanics of the possession and the interactions with the characters once they were there. You know, when she's like turning more grotesque to eventually wake up and try to reach out to the guy.
Yeah.
And they blast through the door, and there's just a lot more of like, oh, I guess they didn't grab him the right way, or So that lost me a bit.
I feel like this movie for me is like a movie of extremes. Like the things that I feel like it nails really, really well, and the things that it fails excruciatingly bad. Like there's a number of characters that I feel like just are totally flat, and like I just don't buy.
Right.
But there are a handful of characters that I think do great. Like I think Donald Pleasance, axe throwing aside, was fantastic as the priest. Like he was very believable. I mean, he's always great, but like
I believe
really good in that moment. For me, like rewatching this, knowing the dream sequence was unnerving, but not as creepy as I remember. What was creepier than I remember is when the big black dude gets possessed. And he comes back to life, and he's like looking at the mirror and laughing, and like like he was very good, and almost like it could have easily been too much and really corny, and it kind of was, but it kind of really worked because he kept it up the entire time. And like I agree, like the way the green goo like just kind of like squirt gunned into people's mouths was a little dumb, but like the whole aesthetic of like the effects of the green goo, that thing was really kind of good. They did a great job making that feel spooky and like kind of weird and isolated in that space. When
it's
she was
great visuals, like we get those wide shots of the room, and it's this ornate like chamber with the green swirling goo. It almost makes you think that like some of these were things that like came to Carpenter like in like a dream or something, and he was like, I need to have this image in the movie. Let's reverse engineer a story around it.
You know, all I could think of though, like especially the first time that Donald Pleasance like takes them down there, there's all those candles in that room, and I'm like, did Donald light all those? Like, who lit all those candles? Who's keeping them burning? Like, that's a lot of candles to maintain. And he's, I think, the only member of the church that's overseeing that building there. So that was all great. I love the when the dude that like isn't buying what they're doing is gonna leave, and he goes into this bizarre empty lot that's right outside the church, and all the visuals they have of like how far away he is from the church and things like that. And then he gets possessed, and he calls to everybody from the ground, and they all go to the window and stuff like that. I mean, those effects are very dated, like his head falling off and stuff, but like, I don't know, that's just like kind of weird and kind of gross and creepy in the right way for me. It's interesting to think about like the isolation in this movie of them being walled off in the church is a very big parallel to The Thing. Even though they're not in the middle of the Antarctic or Arctic, wherever they were, they're Antarctic. They weren't in the Arctic. Even though they're at a church in a big city, they're still walled off and secluded, and you never really see any of the populace outside that. Something I found interesting, because I have this on Blu-ray, and there is a alternate cut of the intro of the movie that aired on TV. And it's similar in many ways to the movie, but it has a shift that dramatically changes the meaning of the entire movie. So you see our main man, our main mustache guy, being a creeper on campus, looking at his crush and things like that. He goes back to his apartment, and I think in the original version of the movie, there's a story on TV or something about a new galaxy being discovered or something like that. Well, in this alternate version, there's a story about a religious text being uncovered somewhere, which is shown in news footage to be essentially the religious text that they're translating in the church. Then he goes to bed, and then we get the wavy transition on the screen that he's about to start dreaming, and then it cuts to the rest of the movie. So for some reason, somebody decided to cut a version of this movie in the beginning that implies that the entire thing is a dream. And my understanding is that there's nothing that happens after that, or like later in the movie, that's changed or anything. It's literally just this opening sequence that actually what happens is he goes into a dream, and then it cuts to the priest dying on the bed with the little key on his chest. Which is just a wild choice in my mind to suddenly be like, you know what? Hey, this will work better if it's a dream. But maybe somebody at, NBC was like, we can't do this if it's sacrilegious. So we make it a dream. We're all good.
Yeah. Or maybe it was something about the blending of science and religion, because
you
imply like this is caused by a supernova, like, the devil is real, God is real, because we're saying it like came from this scientific phenomenon. That's fascinating, Dustin. I had no idea.
Yeah.
I appreciate something I appreciated is just when you think about science and religion and how they interact or don't. And a lot of horror movies that employ religion as a motivating factor for characters, it was nice to sort of see the parallel between, I'm thinking about that line of like, we have to stay, the work we do here tonight is so important, like that scientific fervor that I think we don't demonize, really.
Pun intended.
All that. Yeah. And that's not something, that's usually something that as society, just as a society, right? It's like we don't think about as a negative. We think about it as this positive drive that gets us to a place, and it's the reason we have knowledge and understanding and all that stuff. And then you see it in the religious context, and it's usually negative and fundamentalism, and it leads to bad things. And I liked how those two were just parallel on this. Like you had one vanguard for each. You had the priest and you had the professor, and they were both interested in getting to that next place for different. I like the interplay of that, and just again in terms of like the setting of this whole thing.
Yeah. That being said, if my college math professor told me to clear my weekend schedule so I could go sleep in a cot in a creepy church, I'd be like, dude, I've got to go work at the grocery store. Are you paying me for this or what? Like, I can't afford to not work this weekend.
Everyone was immediately gung-ho to be like, well, I guess that's my weekend.
I suppose except for the one dude was like not there for it at all the entire time. And then I get it. I mean, he got a pretty short end of the stick being stuck in the closet with lady gestating into creepy skinless person. Like she was pretty creepy when she woke up and was looking for and like doing that whole thing.
Yeah. I agree with you that some of those scares weren't always super effective, but I think that scene with that character trapped in the closet, kind of watching her transform, that was some very effective horror.
Yeah. I also feel like my biggest gripe with this movie is I feel like it ends very anticlimactically, with redheaded woman just like deciding to like push her through the mirror, and like that's it. But I do feel like like that jump scare at the end, which we get a very similar jump scare in The Mouth of Madness when he wakes up in bed and like rolls over when she's there in bed next to him, is exceptionally well done. It's a jump scare. On that note, should we jump to In the Mouth of Madness?
Yes.
Let's do it.
Who wants to go first here?
I will go first. I hated this movie. This was everything I didn't. So this was everything that I didn't like, that I kind of talked about, the things that I don't like about horror, is that I didn't think that, as opposed to The Thing, which I think the setting is very interesting. I think the psychological thriller nature is very interesting. Prince of Darkness, the how we get there, and this weird deconstruction of religion and all that stuff, and antimatter and the use of science and history and all that, and all that, you know, it's interesting. It brings me in. Nothing about In the Mouth of Madness brought me in, and it you know, I would have loved. Frankly, it's weird. It's like you get to the point where this author is somehow been given a power, or has a power to write into reality the destruction of all that we know, and that, you know, if you read the words, you're broken down. That to me was wholly uninteresting, and I felt that, like, what would have been more effective for me as a viewer is just, no, his writing fucks people up. There's like that's all there is. We don't need to go further than that. It doesn't need to be a power. It doesn't need to be this weird town that he can manifest with his words. It literally is writing that is so impactful that it makes people go insane. That to me is like more than enough, and I'm very interested in that. And it's grounded in this, I don't know, it's not to say reality, because that seems a little ridiculous, but it's grounded in this way where him being sort of this agent of chaos and having an understanding that he can write, and that things that then come to pass, and that he knows everything and all. I just like, and the scene where you get to the conversations with him, and everything's breaking down, and people can't do stuff because it never really drew me in that way. And I guess I was always disappointed that it made that move, and it wasn't just, very similar to, like, we don't understand how the thing operates. This shit is crazy. Things happen. They're awesome. Prince of Darkness, you know, like, we don't really understand this green goo. But there's some science aspects. Things happen. Interesting. This to me was just like, I would have loved more not knowing. I would have loved more not knowing about this whole world creation stuff. And there was I did like some fun visuals, like the scene where they're driving, and then he's asleep and she's driving, and things just kind of start to break down. She looks down, she looks out, she passes this person, she passes an older version, she hits the person, that person. All of that was like interesting, and I was on edge there, and I thought those were good affecting scenes. I liked the opening, you know what I mean? Like, the not knowing, right? It's that information being kept from you that really makes me want to lean forward more in the movie. And this one just kind of felt like it gave it all away. And then, very similar to what you said about, you know, Prince of Darkness doesn't stick the landing. I just kind of felt like the ending was a little bit, I'm not going to say it was a cop-out, because it's not that, but it just wasn't satisfying. There wasn't, like, the movements of this, and the pacing was also a little bit weird, but like the movements of this were not satisfying in the way that they were in The Thing, or even in the way that they were a lot of times in the Prince of Darkness. And it just kind of fell in on itself. And what kind of kept me going was that Sam Neill's great.
Yeah.
I'm shocked, actually, to sort of put the existence of Jurassic Park and this movie that close together in years, because
wow, you're right.
Yeah,
I mean,
true. That's very true.
Like, I'm watching, when you said the year of this, which I hadn't really, you know, internalized, like, wait a second, wasn't Jurassic Park like 2 years later or something?
Yeah.
3-4 years later max? And Sam Neill in that feels old, and he's gone through things, and like he knows, and he's the archaeologist. And in this, he definitely seems like the piece of shit, you know, freelance insurance broker who thinks he knows everything. and comes in there and, whatever, screws people over who are trying to screw other people over, but yeah, it never felt like it completed anything. And the relationship between him and her was kind of weird. And also very similar to the candles scene in Prince of Darkness, where he's walking down there. I'm like, cool. There's just fires and barrels everywhere. We got fires. Someone's going around the city, lighting every fire, every barrel they could find. And it just never got there for me. Like the Thing really did, and Prince of Darkness sometimes did. This for me,
Yeah.
Sure.
and this is also now a movie that I own because that's the way that the internet.
It
Enjoy,
definitely,
my friend, enjoy.
it definitely feels like, I say this without knowing that I want this, or being confident that I want this. But this feels like a movie that could go with like another 20 or 30 minutes of like more filling in some blanks and things like that. And not even necessarily, like, for me at least, the incompleteness of it is kind of part of what we're experiencing. If you view it as though he's the character in Sutter Kane's story, we're watching the story play out as we watch the movie. So we're not aware of the entire story until we see it in the movie, blah, blah, blah. I could say that on repeat. But I think that, like, watching it, there's just more that could be done more interestingly. Like, it feels incomplete in a way, but I don't know that I want more of it, or that more of it would, like, it's one of those things where it's like, it feels incomplete, but I feel like if I got more, I would just be more unsatisfied with it. I feel like I'm looking at what I reviewed this movie in the past on Letterboxd, and I give it a 4 out of 5, and I think I'll give it a 4 out of 5 again. But I can totally understand why you would hate this, Kyle, or why anybody would hate this, because especially of these three, this is the weakest one by a country mile in terms of, for me, like the completeness of the story, or like being able to like enjoy it because you're not so disconnected from it because it's so confusing. But it definitely as well has some really cool moments, and like I'm a sucker for like Lovecraftian, like otherworldly, unknowingly evil things.
What is the H.P. Lovecraft? Can you enlighten me? I don't know this. I don't know anything about this. When you said that earlier, Alex, I don't understand. Tell me, what is that?
In terms of this movie specifically, or like Lovecraft in general?
Both.
I'll take a stab, and then Alex, if you want to take a stab. You might be more familiar with Lovecraft than I am. I've never actually read any of his original stuff, maybe some short things, but essentially his whole shtick, if you want to call it that, is like unknowingly evil, like unquantifiably dark and evil creations and machinations and things like that. So Cthulhu is probably his most well-known monster or elder god. But it's really just like, if you really want to boil it down, it's like like his own universe of monsters, and like things being from the dark of eternity and ancient evil kind of things. And so I think in this movie, the Sutter Kane's new editors, as he calls them, or new publishers, as he calls them, this ancient evil that lived in Hobbs End and was reawakened by him, or whatever that is. So that's a really choppy, bad explanation.
I think you definitely got at some key things there. The things I would add are one big theme in Lovecraft. I'm thinking of the novella that this is probably most directly paying homage to, At the Mountains of Madness. And one of the themes there is horrors beyond human comprehension. And when a human mind sees one of these elder gods, one of these monsters, it fractures upon itself. People go crazy when they see these creations. So I'd say that's one core theme. And another is just having things be so scary that they are indescribable, that there are so many facets to these monsters that have tentacles and are inhumanly big. And there's a lot of horror and fiction that's Lovecraft inspired that you might have seen, Kyle. So things like The Mist, the adaptation of a Stephen King novel, is Lovecraft inspired. The first Hellboy movie has a lot of Lovecraft DNA. Stephen King is heavily inspired by Lovecraft, just the idea of these elder gods, these beings that have always been here, that are beyond human comprehension and will drive us crazy if we encounter them. So it's definitely playing with the insanity part and tentacles. Lovecraft loved him some tentacles. Carpenter, I feel like, really taps into that in this movie. But before we get into more Elder Gods bullshit, I want to ground this a little bit and talk about what I loved about this movie, because I thought this was head and shoulders above Prince of Darkness.
Okay.
The Thing is a perfect genre flick. This does not come anywhere near close to touching The Thing, but I liked this the second best for sure. And I think what helped me latch onto it was Sam Neill's character and Sam Neill's arc. In a lot of ways, it feels like it has the most straightforward traditional narrative, where we've seen this story before, where it's a cynic who gets dragged into the world of the supernatural and has his illusions shattered. And, I thought that was all very well done. I thought Sam Neill's descent into madness was very, realistically sketched out, where it could have been extremely cartoonish and extremely hammy. I thought that was, he gave a great performance here.
I don't know what I just did. Sorry. I'm screwing up your mojo. Sorry about that.
That's great. And yeah, so I really latched on to Sam Neill's arc, and I think that helps me. And I just love a good road trip movie. So I like that we got the journey to whatever that fictional town that they go to.
Hobbs End.
Hobbs End, thank you. I like that part of it. As you mentioned, Kyle, things do start to deteriorate. And I agree that the relationship between our protagonist and the love interest wasn't fully fleshed out beyond her being corrupted and being possessed. But I think what elevated this is that when we do get the revelation that this is all a work of fiction that is brought to life, that we're seeing in action, I dig the hell out of that. And that resonates with me deeply as someone who was an English major and is a writer and editor. And just, I like things that play with the power of storytelling and the ways that the lines between fiction and reality can become blurred. And even though in some ways we get too much explanation and in some ways not enough, I thought the breaking down of those boundaries and the way that is highlighted visually with all of the nightmare scenes, I think we get a quadruple nightmare wake up, which is amazing. And there's a great jump scare there. But yeah, there was just a lot here that resonated with me, both narratively, thematically, and I just thought this was a fun, scary time. This definitely creeped me out the most of the three that we watched.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely appreciate kind of your take on that and how it speaks to you. Where it kind of kills me though is I want the book and the writing to be the scary part, and in the end, it's kind of like the author is the scary part, and I almost kind of wanted Sutter Kane to be scared of himself and scared of this power that he doesn't understand. And that's kind of because that, I don't know, that again, I'm just rewriting the movie for my own benefit and all that. But yeah, that's just what I wanted out of it. And it was just frustrating that at the end we got this villain that I was like, I don't fucking care about you.
It's not a horror movie, but have you ever seen Stranger Than Fiction with Will Ferrell?
Yes.
Yeah.
And some would call that fucking horror movie.
Yeah, arguably, yeah, I can see that. I feel like, you know, I hear what you're saying, because I feel like it's almost like, in a way, it's like this movie, especially, you know, the end scene for sure of him going into the cinema and watching himself, very meta. But even like shortly before that, when he encounters Sutter Kane, ostensibly in the church, and Sutter, you know, gives him the final manuscript, and goes with his publishers, you know, tears himself open and opens the page of the book, and we see the book, and Neil looks through the page, or looks out of the book into the world where the otherworldly demons come. I almost feel like this movie should have been more meta. Like, I would have been more interested in it if it would have like told a more interesting story of like them realizing they're in the book, or him realizing he's in the book, and maybe trying to manipulate that to some extent, but not being able to do that or something. And it just kind of skirted the edges with that. And then all of a sudden, by the time we skirt the edge of like, oh, he's like actually in the book, then all of a sudden it's like, actually, he's in the movie, watching the movie that's by John Carpenter at the movie theater. Like, which is, I think, is a great scene. But I feel like maybe if it had been more meta in that regard, there would have been more to see of like, it opens the question to me of like, the Sutter Kane that we met, was that even the real Sutter Kane that was writing the books, or was that the Sutter Kane that was in the book that was being written, and so he was more evil? I don't know. Kind of a thing.
I did think that was the weakest part, was the Sutter Kane antagonist. It was just a little bit too hokey, a little bit too, you know, I am the god of this universe, kind of a trope. That wasn't as effective for me as if he had stayed, you know, behind the page, so to speak.
That is a pretty cool scene when he appears on the bus and tells them, "Did I ever tell you my favorite color is blue?" And then he wakes up and the entire bus is like blue. I thought visually that was a pretty fun, like,
yeah, I love that
kind of moment.
Yeah, I just kind of want that. Like, I wanted it all to come from, similar to like, I'm a religious person, I have to investigate these things. I'm a scientific person, I have to investigate these things. To like, I am a writer who Stephen King's a great example. I mean, that dude cannot stop writing. It just comes out of him, right? And that kind of exploiting that drive that writers have to just write,
mm-hmm.
and kind of being a slave to it and not being the agent I would have just kind of loved that a little bit more, like that, you know, and that honestly, that maybe would have gone to more of like it being controlled from beyond in a way that, yeah, and all those things. I don't know. I also think that those two characters, Sam Neill, I don't remember who plays the female lead, but they needed to have sex and it needed to get really weird. I was robbed at that. I was robbed.
I thought it was building to that, and we never got it.
Never got it, and I was like ready for it to be. Yeah, I was ready for it to get super weird, and it just never did. And yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, the closest we got to sex is the old lady having her naked husband handcuffed to her ankle.
No, that was affecting, because that always the grandmother in Happy Gilmore, and anytime she shows up anywhere else,
thank you.
Yes, yep.
Anytime she shows up anywhere else and it's creepy, I'm like, what's happening, Grandma?
It feels like a violation of that, like that kind, warm character. It's like, you shouldn't be this like evil presence. What's going on?
Yeah, she's also never been young. It's like, I don't have.
Yeah.
Never show me a movie where she's young. I don't want to. I don't want to see that shit. This
reminds me. I was going to mention with Prince of Darkness. Did either of you watch Brooklyn Nine-Nine?
I have watched some. Yes.
You know the two bumbling older cops, Scully. I forget the other character's name. One of them, the bald one, played the guy in Prince of Darkness, who the fatter guy, balding guy, who gets possessed early or killed. He's not the first person possessed, but he's killed by the first woman that's possessed. She like breaks his neck, which is just an interesting cameo. I thought there was a lot of great character actors in more than any of the other movies in the Mouth of Madness. I mean, you've got John Glover, who was the administrator of the psych ward, who played a bunch of like different roles in the 80s and 90s and was Lionel Luthor in Smallville and stuff like that. David Warner, who was the guy interviewing Sam Neill in the insane asylum. He was in Titanic and most notably in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, The Secret of the Ooze. It's the guy who made the ooze.
Yes.
The insurance owner who employs Sam Neill at the beginning. The thing I always know that guy from is Revenge of the Nerds. He's like the head of the black fraternity that the nerds join or whatever. And then probably most notably in here is what's his name?
You talking Charlton Heston?
Charlton Heston. Yes. No, I was
sure.
yes, but I was specifically going to talk about Vigo the Carpathian from Ghostbusters 2, who is the dude that shoots himself in the town in the Mouth of Madness, in the bar towards the end.
I'm glad you brought that up because I love that moment, and I think that's the scariest moment for me in any of these three movies, because I'm very creeped out by the idea of being a character in someone else's story and being like fated to follow a certain course of action because it was written that way. And I think he just sells the hell out of that, like kind of resigned, well, I'm going to shoot myself now. It's what I'm supposed to do.
Yeah.
It was a very chilling moment for me. I love that.
Yeah, that was definitely a good, like, a kind of a creepy moment. And like, it's fast, like that character, however small it is interesting that he's like the only person in the town that Sam Neill talks to that's seemingly normal or aware of what's going on, at least the first time he encounters him. And then the second time he says the other thing creepy where he's like, I don't know what came first, us or the book, which is also pretty creepy when you think about it.
Yeah. Yeah, it just all comes back to me for the writing and what's scary and what's motivating, things like that. That one scene where Sam Neill's talking on the phone to someone about the books, and he's like, "Yeah, it's there's just there's something here. It just gets you."
Yeah,
that I just wanted so much more from that. Well, and I feel like we just went to the weird antagonist stuff, but I mean, it also was. There was definitely some scary parts. There was some interesting. I mean, I liked some of the stuff we saw visually.
Yeah.
More than pretty much anything I saw in Prince of Darkness.
Okay.
You know what I mean? I guess I'll say that. Like he said, Alex, the road trip aspect, the town stuff, the church stuff, just some of the. I mean, the insane asylum. I mean, a lot of those things I just appreciated visually in a way that I never got any of that in Prince of Darkness, really. But
yeah, I feel like you can. I don't know what the budgets are for these, but this one feels like it had the biggest budget. Certainly the biggest sets and things like that.
Yeah,
and trying to see like scope and stuff, because I feel like for me, like some of the effects of Prince of Darkness are really fun, but I wouldn't say they're great. They're just like, because I love thinking about the mechanics of how they did them, they're really cool and unique. But In the Mouth of Madness feels much more like realistically unsettling, like when the agent breaks through the window with the axe at the beginning and do reads on her cane and has like the double pupils in each eye, like that's really great. And then later on, Sam Neill goes to the store to buy Sutter Kane books, and there's the dude there that's like kind of pseudo possessed, and he sees the kid at the end when he attacks the kid with the axe. Like, there's. I will not go as far as to say that In the Mouth of Madness feels more realistic to me, but like some of the visuals feel more realistically unsettling to me than the other movies for sure.
Yeah, more fleshed out, and they're definitely falling into that cliche, but I thought that the creepy kids in this movie were exceptionally creepy.
Yeah.
The makeup was done was very unnerving.
Yes, for sure. Should we wrap this up with our final thoughts, maybe?
Yeah, I think we should do some rankings maybe. And I think it'd be fun if we could rank both our order of what we like the most and the least, and what we found the scariest and the least scary.
Okay. I'll go first as the picker of these. I would say, The Thing goes far and above for either of these, like solid 5 out of 5, best movie of all time. And then would probably put, out of a 5-star rating, I would probably give both In the Mouth of Madness and Prince of Darkness 4 out of 5. But for me, I think Prince of Darkness just gets a little bit of an edge above In the Mouth of Madness, but not much. And it's probably kind of one of those things that depends on what kind of mood I'm in or something. To that point of like what I found the scariest, I don't know that any of these feel particularly scary to me anymore, because I've watched them so many times that I'm like so desensitized to that. But I would say that like there's a feeling. Prince of Darkness gives me a feeling of isolation more than obviously more than In the Mouth of Madness. I don't think isolation is a huge piece of that, but like even more so than The Thing, Prince of Darkness feels more unnerving, because for me to find myself at a Antarctic research base completely cut off from the world, there would have to be a lot of dominoes to fall to get to that point. Whereas like for me to somehow not that I spend a lot of time in churches, but for me to somehow be stuck in a creepy church in a metropolitan area feels much more realistic. Like that environment feels much more accessible and realistic. And that idea of suddenly being in a building and like being cut off from the world is kind of terrifying to me in that way. So, and yeah, even though it didn't have the same kind of scare effect, this time around, but that video clip kind of stuff, like just still creeps a little bit under my skin. Alex, how about you?
Yeah, in terms of, which I like the most, The Thing is obviously on that masterpiece tier. Really impeccable. I think after that, I do really like In the Mouth of Madness. That is one that I would be excited to rewatch one day, whereas I can't really see myself ever rewatching Prince of Darkness unless I maybe want to show someone just to have them experience a weird, kind of conceptually ambitious but trippy movie. And then, yeah, Prince of Darkness is number 3. For what I found the scariest, I do think that In the Mouth of Madness unnerved me the most. I think that concept of being driven to insanity was executed really well, and I found that descent by Sam Neill really convincingly portrayed, and there are just a lot of images from that movie that get under my skin when I think about them. Prince of Darkness is probably after that. I think it does a great job of building dread in that first half hour when you're not really sure what's happening, and it's kind of taking you deeper and deeper into the interior of this church, and you're seeing the shots of the bugs coalescing and the homeless and insane people outside getting closer and closer. I think that's all really unnerving and effective. And I can't say The Thing scared me at all. And that may just be because of how well I know it. Even though I've only seen it once, I just know it through pop culture osmosis. And I think I'm just having too much fun with The Thing, where I'm smiling at the craftsmanship, I'm loving the music, I'm loving the writing. It's just too delightful of a film for me to ever really be scared by it, whereas the other two were more unpredictable because I knew them less and they frightened me more. What about you, Kyle?
It's interesting. I guess it's The Thing for me, Head and Shoulders Above, and then Prince of Darkness, and then In the Mouth of Madness last, which shouldn't be a shock to anyone based on what I've said here today.
I would have loved if you came out and said, I hated The Thing more than anything else, that it's like bottom of the barrel movie for me.
Yeah, just ultimate reversal. And in terms of what scared me, I guess scared for me, and this goes back to my initial story. Scared for me is not what scares me in the moment. Scared for me is like what I can't shake after, right? Because The Sixth Sense certainly scared me. There's The Exorcist certainly scared me. Jurassic Park scared me. But like, there's the what am I thinking about as I'm falling asleep that night, and is it keeping me awake? And of the three movies, The Thing actually, unlike what you said, Dustin, before I had a wife and child, I could absolutely see myself fielding a phone call from some unknown number and them being like, listen, we're going to give you $300K. You're going to go to the Antarctic. You're going to handle shit. You don't need to be a scientist, but like, you're going to go, you're going to be there for a year. This is what, and I would be like, yeah, I'm going. Like,
I used to look to see, like, twice a year I would look and see if they were hiring like food service people, because you can go run a 6-month stint, and for average shows like us that don't have a PhD in mineral science, we would literally have to be a custodian or like a chef or a line cook to have a role down there. But there is that opportunity, so I agree with that. I can see that.
Yeah, and they're different from going in the middle of nowhere in South Korea, Kyle.
Yeah, there you go.
Honestly, the terrifying level that drive into the mountains took when you're just retreating from the city. You're like, oh, I'm in the city, it'll be fine. And then you just drive to some fucking unknown place. Yeah, that I agree. And so it like sort of similar to how what you said, Alex, about like insanity and Mouth of Madness, now that's affecting like the breakdown of insanity in The Thing with all those people. Granted, it's very justified with what's going on, but kind of the I can't trust my own eyes or even myself. I felt that was like affecting in The Thing, and my wife is away when I watched all these. My wife and child were away when I watched all these movies, and the one that like there was just a little bit of a, I'm just gonna put the shade down. I'm just gonna put the shade. I'm just gonna close that door. I don't know why. All that was after I watched The Thing, and The Prince of Darkness and Mouth of Madness didn't have that kind of lasting effect on me in any way. Yeah.
Okay. Well, Alex, do you want to share what you've got on deck for our next episode, and then I'll do a little outro here?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really excited for this one. We are doing 3 films that all use color in interesting ways. And for those, I have selected Suspiria, the original, not the remake, Kurosawa's Ran, and Portrait of a Lady on Fire for number 3.
Very exciting. I've only ever seen Suspiria myself, so I'm excited to watch those other 2.
I've only ever seen Ron, so.
Awesome. Well, this is Triple Take Cinema, 3 guys and 3 movies, and we'll see you guys next week.
Yeah.